Hello and welcome back to Let's Play Alundra. On the last episode we cleared the first half of Aline's dreams, now let's go ahead and take care of the second two branches of her pretty warped subconscious, all things considered. This is obviously the fire dungeon. We unlocked it after clearing the sand dungeon sort of arbitrarily. There's no real order yet to do these things in. So I'm taking great pains to avoid the lava in these little platforming segments, but you only take 1 point of damage every time you fall in, so really there's no point in bothering. It's not really worth it. The bosses are easy enough now that we have the upgraded earth magic, and you pass by the save point often enough that doesn't really matter. Anyway, hitting those switches in the right order will allow us to hit this teleporter, which gives us the option to get the column for this sub-dungeon, and strangely enough it makes the fire column go down instead of up, which... I don't know. It just if you haven't run into the fire columns yet, you wouldn't really understand why that was relevant, but we'll see why that was important in a couple of rooms. Anyway, again, here I'm still sort of holding to the illusion that it matters if I fall into the lava or not. I might as well just tank hits after a while, so yeah, I don't even bother making the jumps by this point. Again, if I don't go into a teleporter, it just means that it leads to one of the connecting rooms, which aren't really relevant because we've either already explored a sub-dungeon or we're not allowed to go there yet, so the connecting rooms really aren't that useful. Anyway, Maya's trapped again. She, again, as usual, needs our help. If you only knock down one of the levels of these little stone platforms, you can use them as stepping stones to get to the chests on the columns, but they only contain herbs, so I'm not going to bother during this playthrough. However, clearing that blockage out from Maya did give us access to this teleport, sort of a clue that this is the right way to be going. You can see the diamond sigils that we're going to be accessing when we're in the ice sub-dungeon, the fourth, the one that we haven't gotten to yet. And you can actually, at the bottom of this room, there's actually a connecting teleporter to the ice sub-dungeon. It's not really relevant. This is also the room where the fire columns were, and you can see down the south region, you can see the fire symbols. Now that we've cleared those columns out of the way, we can drop down to the floor below. There's the ice teleporter that we can't access. If you very lightly hold the up button as you drop down, you'll be able to land on one of these columns, and we saw this in the connecting room to, I believe, the sand dungeon, but I'm not really sure. To the north is the teleporter back to the fire dungeon, which we now have access to. And this chest was really important because obviously it contains the key that we need to get to the boss room itself, so let's go ahead and do that. Again, like I said, these teleporters just that I don't immediately go into just lead to connecting rooms. And basically anything you can reach from one of the first couple of rooms that don't lead to the next puzzle room will always lead to a connecting room. Anyway, let's go ahead and take the left door now, and see if we can find the next sort of multiple personality of Aline. Only because it's a little obtuse what you have to do. You'll see there are certain vents in the floor that are a little bit larger than the other ones. What you want to do is land these boulders on specifically the larger ones. If you walk into one of the jets while you're carrying a boulder, the boulder will shatter and you have to start the puzzle all over again, which is annoying. The puzzle itself doesn't really have an obvious clue. There's a little sign that tells you something about the fruit of the land, which isn't really easily interpretable or possibly may have been poorly translated. But most players, I suppose, given enough trial and error, will figure this out pretty quickly, considering it's actually pretty obvious that some of these stand out from the other ones, the little vents in the floor. Anyway, that's it. Three puzzles, 3 rooms as usual, so now it's time to equip our Earth Book and go ahead and fight Aline for the 3rd time. Idealistic roaches check in. Haha, that's funny. It's a pop culture reference again. Hadn't had one of those directly in a while. I suppose Aline can be forgiven because she's actually crazy. Anyway, this is actually the last time we'll be seeing the Hidden Eye. They only make you fight one, considering the boss arena is a little bit more complicated than it was in the sand dungeon and the water dungeon. But, well, there's a scripted Hidden Eye fight at the end of all 4 of the sub-dungeons, but the 4th one is actually the main Aline personality, and these 3 are supposed to represent sort of corruptions that were sentenced, but that were given life by Melzus. So by killing the 3 corruptions, we're actually sort of bringing the main personality back to light. So after this, there's no boss at the end of the dungeon. It's actually a little anticlimactic, all things considered. We'll be dealing with that in a minute, though. This is the 3rd multiple personality all the way. It's a bit of an interesting interpretation of actual schizophrenia, considering a lot of people who develop that disorder do so. The multiple personalities guard the central, actual, original personality from external trauma. And technically, considering that, Alundra and Maya are invaders, they would attack us because we're not part of her original psyche. It kind of makes sense that we have to fight her. Even if she is supposedly has been given that form by Melzus as opposed to taking that form to defend Eileen's inner subconscious from us. Anyway, let's go ahead and explore the ice dungeon. The heart container for this level isn't particularly worth talking about. It's just there. You might as well pick it up as we pass through. You can very easily fall down the inner holes in this first room, which is kind of a pain considering this place obviously uses the same sort of goofy ice physics that Klein's Dream used and the Ice Manor used. Yeah, we came really close right there. It's for the best to make sure to switch between the Fiend Blade and the Iron Flail, just because the Fiend Blade is so much stronger than the Flail. But it is also important to use the Flail to get these little columns out of the way in certain areas. Most of the time we can push them out of the way, but when they're 2x2, like they were over there, up there in the corner and where we just were, it's best to use the Flail. Anyway, first thing we want to do is actually not deal with this other column puzzle right now, but actually to fall down to this room right here in this teleporter, which will bring us to the little column switch for this sub-dungeon. And again, we've met Maya. This is the one time we're going to be running into her here. This is our requisite Maya puzzle for this sub-dungeon. If you jump on top of her and jump at the same time, she'll make the same stupid comment about stepping on her head that she does every time we do this. And it'll activate the column. So now we actually have to follow this chain of teleporters back to the start, and then go to that one room in the fire dungeon, or the connecting room between the fire and the ice dungeon, that had the ice symbols in it. The easiest way to do that is just to go back to the fire dungeon, as opposed to trying to figure out which spot connects to the ice dungeon, because we haven't been there yet. Navigating your way back to this maze is actually pretty easy, because you can't fall off the outer edges of this, only the middle, only the inner ones. So except for when you have to pass between two of those holes, you can just sort of hug the edge and not really worry about it. And of course, the easiest thing to do is just to clear the little tentacle guys out of the way and not worry about it, but whatever. Anyway, let's go ahead and skip back to that room in the fire dungeon. We'll briefly revisit just to show what I was talking about. You can jump on these rocks, and then on top of these columns. As always, one contains a incredibly useful herb, exactly what I needed right now. The other one contains the key for this for the ice sub-dungeon. Really, you can use the keys in any order, but you'll tend to get them one by one, considering you won't have access to the ability to get each dungeon until you clear them one by one. But it's cool to know that this level is actually pretty close to a standard Zelda dungeon, where you can acquire like large numbers of keys, or a multitude of keys, not necessarily in the area where you need to use them. Which is neat, I guess. It varies the structure of the dungeons a little bit. Anyway, that's really all we need to do. There's the one remaining puzzle, right in the lower room we were before. If you jump down the wrong sort of inner hole, you'll wind up in one of the indentations in the second room, which will force you to take a bunch of teleporters back out again. It's kind of a pain in the butt. But realistically, the actual puzzle is pretty simple. There are 4 switches, one in each corner. They stay pressed when you push them, so the only puzzle is actually getting to them. You can do that pretty easily by just shoving the columns in the logical order that you run into them. Again, let's get to the center one. Now we've just got the upper left and the upper right and the lower right. I'm actually going to go down to the lower right one here and take a look at it. You can use the columns to press down the switches, or you can do it yourself. It really doesn't matter, considering they stay pushed. But considering I'd taken a few trial runs to get through this little dungeon, I decided to go for the upper right one, which to me is considered to be the hardest one, because you have to do that little diagonal jump over there. You cannot jump to the lower right in the diagonal direction because the altar's in the way, so I'm going to try to do it right now. That little teleporting altar is in the way. It doesn't let you jump kitty corner to the other ice column, which could easily push south onto the last switch, so we'll have to get there manually. Which can be done easily, and you can use that column to hit the switch instead. Wonderful. Pretty simple. So the only thing to do now is just to make sure that you don't fall back down into one of the depressions, except for the one that actually leads to the end. This room thankfully does not have the ice physics, so that's one nice blessing. And that's it! There's Eileen, the real Eileen. And Maya will point out the fact that this must be the real Eileen. She gives us some emo talk, the fact that we murdered her other personalities in cold blood. But she seems to be pretty understanding, all things considered, which is nice because we don't have to face the hidden eyes using ice physics, which is a pain in the butt. So that's it. Eileen returns us to the real world, and now it's time to collect our reward, whatever that is. Again, it's always nice to get out of one of these dream dungeons without someone dying. It doesn't really happen all that often. And there's some dialogue in here that makes Beaumont look like a bit of a douche, all things considered. I think part of what they were trying to do in the narrative was paint Beaumont as not quite as sympathetic as he was before, considering the revelation we got in the Sanctuary that Beaumont did know that Ronan was worshipping Mel's, or at least an insinuation, although it is obviously unclear how much we can trust Ronan in the first place. Oh, but by the way, we do actually get a reward for doing this. Considering Jess isn't around to smith us stuff anymore, we just get the rewards directly from the people that we help. Gustav will give us an upgrade to the Iron Flail, the Steel Flail. The only difference is it has a charge attack, a little bit more attack, and a little bit more attack power. But it's still weak compared to the Fiend Blade, and I think even compared to the Fire Rod and the Ice Rod, so we won't really be using it. Except in areas like the Ice Dungeon in Elene's Dream that require use of the Flail. And unfortunately, we are not done yet. That's Keisha. Again, she's pretty easy to recognize from the brown dress, as opposed to all the other different color dresses. And we've got another nightmare to contend with. The first time we've actually been called to deal with a nightmare during the night, as odd as that sounds. It's Giles, once again, which is also the first time we've been asked to deal with the same person twice. We did help him once, remember? He was infected with the same thing that Klein was infected with, except we supposedly managed to help Giles. Although, considering how close Giles is to Ronan, it's unclear if, he was completely free of Melz's influence and probably one of the most susceptible people to being infected a second time, if anyone was actually going to have that happen to them. Again, it's sort of a subversion of video game logic that you have to do the same thing twice. It's interesting, I suppose. Anyway, I do like the night village. It's peaceful, considering you almost never do anything really serious here, like outside. But you also rarely actually get to see it, because there's no day-night system in this game, except for when cutscenes demand it. Anyway, Septimus is quite right. This is highly unusual that we would expect that we would have to help the same person twice. It's sort of against anything we've had to do in the game so far. We did murder the Soul Leech. It was pretty obvious. It blew up. Like, we killed it. Dead. Or, undead or whatever. But Maya's got a theory, and this sort of begins to bring to light the overall theme of the overall sort of underarching plot of the game itself that Melzis is trying to accomplish. Remember, 5 years ago, all of his idols were destroyed, except for the one, obviously, that Ronan keeps at the bottom of the sanctuary. So Melzis previously had been sort of visiting these nightmares upon Anoa Village for the last 3 years or so to generate more prayer for himself. Now that Alundra and Maya are here, the nightmares are directly addressed towards killing them. Remember, even in nightmares like Giles' dream, where it was very clear that Giles could die if we failed, the actual nightmare itself, the Soul Leech, was just as much of a threat to us as it was to Giles. And in dreams like Wendell's dream, it actually seemed like the gelatinoid was more of a threat to us than it was to Wendell. Anyway, we've got yet another problem on top of all these things. So this is the first time that Murg have been seen in the village. Remember, previously Klein used to drive them off, but he's been dead for a few days. So apparently this is where they take where they get things together and finally get aggressive enough to actually attack us. So this is evidently the trap. We would go into Giles' dream, and then the Murg would kill us, which is pretty bad. I mean, it's pretty devious, all things considered. It's actually pretty creative of Melzis to set such a trap. Usually, I mean, it's surprising that he didn't try this before then. Anyway, we've got to go outside and actually kill the Murg now, so let's go ahead and show off the Steel Flail charge attack. We don't need the charge attack to deal with the Murg. They're the same ones we've been fighting since the beginning of the game. They die in one hit. It's barely worth making an effort. Although the game does consider this a boss fight. Check this out. We get some stupid celebratory message. Sneaking Murg have been pummeled into lifeless jelly. That's terrible. That's disgusting, actually. It's pretty funny. Also, we're swinging our sword even though we were using the flail, which is stupid. But anyway, what's going on in here? Let's go ahead. I mean, we were only there for 15 seconds, and Septimus and Keisha were apparently huddled in the attic for all that time, terrified. Let's go ahead and let them know that that was no big deal. But no, we haven't even been up here for 5 seconds before Maya's screaming about something downstairs. Let's go see what's going on now. I mean, Jesus, if it's not one thing, it's another today. Yep. And then Giles was a werewolf. So obviously he was, in fact, still infected by the same thing that was infecting Klein, because he's the same werewolf, exactly. This is a bad idea, Keisha, yeah. Of course, Maya has some stupid comment about domestic violence, which is completely pointless. Kills the scene, in my opinion, but thankfully the scene does manage to build itself up pretty well from here. This is the first time someone's actually actively tried to fight in real life, very obviously, against the nightmare visited upon them by Melzis. So Giles thinks Keisha's dead. She's not, and she'll actually talk during this cutscene, thankfully. I mean, God forbid somebody else dies on top of the problems Giles is having. We know the werewolf itself is pretty weak. We killed the Klein one pretty easily. We also get the revelation that Giles is the one who actually killed Sybil, although it was pretty obvious that Ronan was well aware of this fact, considering he was in the cutscene. Anyway, come on, man, fight it. Do it. Do it. Yeah, there we go. Change back. And die. It's pretty anticlimactic, too. I mean, he just kind of keeled over and disappeared. I mean, the game isn't afraid to show corpses. It did show us, like, Sybil's corpse, and she's a kid, which is pretty unusual for video games. I don't know why they made Giles disappear. It was pretty stupid. And it wasn't a new Nightmare Crest. It was the same one as before. Anyway, again, Beaumont had nothing to say but to ask us to quiet the heck down, which, again, sort of makes us sound like a jerk. But it does finally sort of bring light to the fact, yeah, see, they're finally starting to understand that Melzus is not a good guy. Even people like Beaumont, who are sort of on the fence. By this point, the game is sort of reaching its climax. I mean, it's pretty obvious we're close to the end game, because we have the majority of the collectibles, and very few empty spaces left in our inventory screen, but now the narrative is sort of starting to catch up to what the player expects. The villagers are finally starting to understand that Melzus is not something to be prayed to, and they should actually be praying to Alundra to give him strength. As we know, the spirits of the deceased can give Alundra a great deal of power. A lot of our weapons are crafted from the souls of people who we failed to save, so this is not a triviality, this particular dialogue. Anyway, that clears this scenario. We have no indication of what to do next. We have someone else dead, even though we saved Aline, and no direction. So I guess we'll have to figure out what to do next and explore the town. Well, we'll do that in the next episode of Let's Play Alundra. All I have to do here is quickly save, and then I guess after that I will see you then.